You're listening to the Oddscast, the original UFC betting podcast that's straight to the point. Hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. They provide you the absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting. MMAOddsBreaker.com. Don't place your wagers without us.
Welcome to the Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on ESPN Plus 16 event, which takes place in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, Kyle Marley's premium bets for UFC 242 won 0.7 units overall. Kyle has his bets and fantasy MMA picks available now on MMAOddsBreaker.com. Back to the present, UFC on ESPN Plus 16 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired exclusively on ESPN Plus this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on the preliminary card is a lightweight contest between Kyle Prepolek, who is 12-6, and Austin Hubbard, who is 10-3. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
As always, a couple quick shout-outs before I get started here. Make sure you guys head over to betdsi.eu and check those guys out. They are the updated lines that I'm going to be reading out here in a few minutes. And also head over to MMAOddsBreaker.com, click on our Premium Picks tab, and check out Big Marley 3's premium plays. The guy's been killing it, up over 270 units the last 16 months. That's up over 27K. Don't miss out. He's got a couple plays posted. He's also got his DraftKings analysis posted right now as we speak as well. Head over to the site, get the premium pick section, and win some money this weekend. Getting right into the fights, though. Right now, Hubbard open minus 230, the comeback on Prepolek at plus 170. Right now, the current line over at BetDSI is Hubbard minus 130. The comeback on Prepolek is at plus 108. So line margins have tightened up. More action coming in on the dog. I don't blame the people coming in early on taking that dog price on Prepolek. If you're looking at the records on paper, yeah, Prepolek 12-6, not a very attractive record per se. I mean, having 6 losses or whatever, but you got to dig a little bit deeper than that. So again, I think the average Joe that's just kind of looking at this and not digging deeper into this fight is probably going to think Hubbard is the right side just by records alone. But if you're digging deeper, both these guys are pretty solid. This is going to be an awesome fight. It's going to be a very competitive matchup. And that's why I think the early action on Prepolek was actually justified, because I can understand Hubbard being a very small favorite, but nothing major here, because this fight's going to go back and forth. There's a lot of similarities between the two. Both these guys, I really like what I see on the feet. They're both strong. They like to push a high pace. I think actually Prepolek has a little bit of a striking edge over Hubbard. He mixes things up a little bit better. I think he could be a little bit more effective, but Hubbard does have some power. He packs a punch as well. As far as the ground game goes, I think they both have capabilities there. Both have decent takedown defense, both hard to hold down. I think Hubbard is a little bit maybe ahead of Prepolek on the ground slightly, but Prepolek is definitely getting better throughout his career. You can see the progress in his game as well. So again, I think this fight is going to be very competitive. These guys are going to kind of neutralize each other out back and forth as it goes. And I think the difference in this fight is honestly going to be Prepolek just outscoring and outpointing Hubbard a little bit more as the fight goes on. So it'll be a back and forth split decision type of fight, I'm thinking here. And I'm going to side with the hometown, the edge, going towards the Canadian here with Prepolek getting the nod on the scorecards. I think that's how it's going to play out. A very close competitive decision, but I'm going to go with Prepolek to get the W here.
And I'm going to go the other way. Obviously, Prepolek is a dangerous fighter, and he's got some power on the feet, and he probably is the better wrestler of the two. So if this does stay standing for all 3 rounds, I would favor Prepolek. But I also feel like Hubbard is a little bit of the more well-rounded fighter of the two. He's got some decent wrestling. You know, he's got that LFA background. I think Hubbard has faced better competition over the course of his career, and I think that could come into play here. So I think Hubbard is going to mix in some takedowns, and that will keep Prepolek a little bit off balance on the feet. It'll allow Hubbard to hold his own in the wrestling so that, you know, Prepolek isn't blowing him out, and Hubbard can use that top position to win some rounds. So I don't think that Hubbard is going to dominate on the ground. I don't think that he'll spend the whole fight in top position or anything, But I think he can mix in enough takedowns to keep Propolic guessing a little bit. So, and I think that will allow Hubbard to win a decision. But if Propolic stuffs Hubbard's takedowns early and Hubbard, moves away from that and this just becomes a stand-up fight, I would favor Propolic to get the win, but I do think that Hubbard sneaks in a couple takedowns and that will help him get the victory. So I think it'll be close, but I'm leaning Hubbard. Now dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Ryan Mcdonald, who is 10-1, taking on Louis Smolka, who is 15-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Smolka opens minus 230. The comeback on McDonald at plus 170. So similar opening line, obviously, to the last one we were just talking about. But right now, this time over at BetDSI, we are seeing Smolka at minus 278. The comeback on McDonald at plus 221. So this time, the action coming in on Smolka. It's kind of a tough spot. Not really surprised. Obviously, Smolka more the household name amongst UFC fans. So he is going to be the more popular side for, again, the diehards. But McDonald is definitely an up-and-coming fighter. I like what I see. I know he had a pretty tough fight against Gutierrez in his UFC debut, but the guy has some skill, and I think he's going to come to fight. And this could be a very challenging fight for Smolka, despite being a solid favorite in this matchup, because I think on the feet is where McDonald can make things a little bit interesting. I don't like his defense. He does have tall man's defense a little bit, and he's very hittable, and you can kind of drop him. He's been hurt in fights as well, but he's tough. McDonald's getting absorbed that punishment. He usually recovers quickly, and he does push forward, and he does have some effective striking offensively, at least. And I think that's where Smolka can get in a little bit of trouble here with McDonald if he cannot utilize his edge in this fight, which is obviously the edge that he has in most fights on the ground. I mean, Smolka's wrestling continues to get better. Of course, his stand-up is actually no joke now. I mean, you got to take his stand-up a bit serious as well. He does find some success on the feet, and then he does get inside and has those body lock type of trip takedowns. And he's successful doing so. And then on the ground, he maneuvers so smooth, so slick. He usually gets most of his opponents in trouble, and he's capable of obviously finishing the fight on the ground as well. So that's what Smolka's going to look to do here. He's going to look to get this fight to the ground. He's going to look to utilize that game plan and try to obviously submit or control McDonald on the ground. I think it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult than people thought. That think at least leading up to this fight, McDonald's going to be game. He's going to show up here, and if it hits the scorecards, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see another split decision type of fight here, and maybe going towards McDonald if it does hit the cards. But with all that said, it's hard to kind of think that he's going to be able to overcome and surpass Smolka's ground game in this spot. So I am going to lean Smolka to win, but where the price is right now, I would not recommend laying 2.5 to 1 on Smolka in this fight, because I do think there's a good chance he does get the fight to the floor and he does have success doing so. But I think McDonald's going to put up a better fight than all of us think, and it's not worth the price of admission right now at that kind of crazy chalk. So if the price kind of drops down, then you might want to consider maybe throwing Smolka in a parlay or whatnot. But outside of that, like I said, I stay away from it, but I'm going to pick Smolka to win.
Yeah, and I'm leaning the same way. Obviously, McDonald is a great athlete. He's got some power. He's dangerous. And if he can connect and really get going on the feet, then he has a good chance to win this fight. But Louis Smolka is very, very good on the ground. I mean, that's clearly been his bread and butter throughout the course of his MMA career. And if he can get McDonald on his back, I think it's pretty much only a matter of time until he can find either a TKO from top position or a submission at some point. You saw in McDonald's debut that he had some trouble with the kicks of his opponent, ended up losing a decision to Chris Gutierrez. And Smolka actually has some pretty good kicks. You know, he's blasted guys with head kicks before. He's he works pretty decent from long range if he can settle down. But obviously, Smolka is clearly at his best when he's in top position, dragging somebody to the ground and working his ground game. So I think at some point he does get that going and ends up getting the stoppage. But if for some reason McDonald is able to thwart Smolka's offensive wrestling, or if McDonald gets top position, or if McDonald is able to, force Smolka into more of a phone booth boxing style fight, McDonald could definitely win. But I do think that Smolka continues this little recent run of where he got back to the UFC and has put together a few good fights, and I think Smolka gets the job done with top position. So Smolka is going to be my pick. Now, moving up to the featherweight division, we have Jordan Griffin versus Chaz Skelly. Griffin is 17-6. Skelly is 17-4. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Skelly open -130, Griffin -110, and right now we're looking over at BetDSI, and we are seeing Griffin at -159, the comeback on Skelly +133. So line flipped, more action coming in Griffin's way. I am surprised by this, honestly. I mean, I know that Chaz Skelly, in my opinion, is the more popular fighter, again, amongst the hardcore MMA fans. The guy has a slick ground game. The guy has a pretty tough style to deal with in most cases as well. So I thought he was going to get the respect over a guy like Griffin, which is still kind of breaking in, trying to get his respect in the UFC thus far. Obviously, his loss to Ige in his official UFC debut does not look all that bad right now because Ige's on just an absolute tear. I mean, the guy's obviously a legit fighter. So Griffin, I mean, if you're looking closer at his resume, the guy has definitely shown some great and drastic improvements in his game. I mean, winning that Dana White Contender Series matchup to even get him the shot in the UFC, that was impressive. But his LFA fights before that, you could see again the progress in his game. So he's been around the block for a while, but he's finally kind of one of those veterans that hit his groove. He's training at a good camp with Duke Rufus and crew, just everything coming into its own. Again, coming off of a UFC debut loss that's actually not that bad right now. I think his confidence is not going to be that hindered by that. And facing a guy like Skelly, in a way, this is kind of a step down in competition. Again, I know that Skelly is a pretty talented fighter. He does have the wrestling pedigree. You can't even take him lightly on the feet. I think the guy has some potential, and he's got some good effective striking at times because he does have a little bit of power. And again, you can't take him lightly. But where it's at with Skelly's obviously his wrestling, his ground game. He's got those slick chokes. He's got the slick submission game. So that's what he wants to do here. I think that matchup-wise, this is kind of going to be a difficult fight for both fighters. I think Skelly might have a little bit of success on the ground against Griffin early on, but I think Griffin can kind of withstand what Skelly throws at him. And if he does that, I think his ground awareness has gotten to the point where he probably can't survive. And then I think he's going to turn the tide. And I really think that out of the two, Griffin is just the better overall fighter. I think he's going to have the more effective striking on the feet. I think he might end up getting top position on the ground as the fight progresses a little bit as well, and he can deliver some punishment. I think his conditioning is a little bit better too. So to me, I'm going to lean with Griffin. I think he is the better fighter here. If he does not get caught in a Skelly choke, I think he probably ends up winning on the scorecards or finishing this fight late as well. So I understand why the line flipped, but I am a little surprised. So those of you guys that got the early, dog price and flipped the line and got a decent price on Griffin early on, I think you guys are on the right track. Skelly's no joke. I respect the guy. I think he is a talented fighter, and he's a dangerous fighter. So at this point, I wouldn't lay that kind of chalk, or if this line continues to climb even more, even though I think Griffin is a side, you got to respect Skelly's game at this point as the line progresses. So I would probably stay away. All the value is probably gone at this point with that. But that said, I still like Griffin to win this fight, and I think he gets it done.
And, just like in several of these other fights, if Griffin can get going with his striking, he's in a really good spot here. This is a guy with a lot of power, and he actually does have a decent ground game as well. So he's dangerous, but he also, in my opinion, has some issues, as you saw in the Dan Ige fight, where he can get put on his back and lose a decision. And while I don't think Chaz Skelly has quite the explosive wrestling of Ige, Skelly still is a strong wrestler. This is a guy that's pretty big for the weight class, physically strong. I think that he can drag Griffin to the ground and put him on his back. On the feet, Skelly has a little bit of pop, but obviously he's hittable. He's been hurt on the feet. He hasn't been fighting nearly as well as he was when he first joined the UFC, but I still think that he's still got plenty of gas left in the tank. Griffin is, I think normally he relies on being a little bit bigger and stronger than his opponents, but Skelly's, one of the bigger, stronger guys in that featherweight division, so I don't think Griffin will have that edge. And while, again, I do think that Griffin has potential, I think Skelly, with his experience, his track record against some pretty decent competition over the course of his career, I think this is still a fight that Skelly can win. clearly, Griffin could be maybe able to have learned enough in the past 9 months since the Ige loss to come over the top. But if he's even close to the same guy, I think Skelly has the wrestling chops to put him on his back and just make this an uncomfortable night for Griffin. And I think Skelly can potentially finish Griffin with a choke. Skelly actually does have some pretty good offensive submissions as well when he puts his opponents in bad positions. So I'm going to side with Skelly, but I would not be shocked if Griffin pulls this one out. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Hunter Azure, who is 7-0, taking on Brad Katona, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Katona open minus 185, the comeback on Azure plus 145. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, we are seeing Katona minus 156, Azure plus 130. So line margins have tightened up. There is two-way action coming into this fight. It's bouncing back and forth a little bit. More action coming in Azure's way as of recently. And again, I think this is going to be another one of those spots where it's a very competitive fight, a back and forth, exciting type of fight with two promising prospects going at it here. Obviously, Azure's coming in off of an impressive Dana White Contender Series win. I mean, I think he really opened up some eyes. I mean, just dominating an undefeated fighter. He looked good doing so. You could really tell he's got wrestling background, obviously. His effective striking in that matchup as well. And looking back through his career, too, thus far, I mean, Azure's one of these guys that's just a natural sponge type of athlete that just picks up and absorbs everything to go along with, again, his wrestling background to the point where I think his striking looks very good at this point, especially with his aggression, pushing forward, mixing in those kicks. Those low kicks that he throws are nasty. So I like what I see in Azure for sure. Katona, of course, I mean, the Ultimate Fighter winner. Obviously, the guy is a well-rounded fighter. He's only getting better as well. He's coming off of a unfortunate loss. It was a close competitive decision loss to Devashvili, but I'll tell you what, Merab is one of the better fighters in the weight class as well, so that's not necessarily a bad loss. And I think Katona obviously looking to bounce back. It's not going to really be a huge setback for him. Obviously, a win over Azure here will get him back on track, and it'll be a very solid win, probably better than most people think here. But Katona is going to have a difficult time doing so because I think how this fight's going to play out, Katona has the better pure jiu-jitsu, but I think overall, as far as the striking goes, his boxing might be a little bit more effective than Azure's, but I think Azure's kicking game is going to be the difference in this fight, where it's going to actually open up some eyes a little bit on the feet when they're standing in the exchanges. So it'll be back and forth. I expect both these guys to score on each other, but I think Azure's kicking game is going to be a little bit of a difference on the feet, and then he probably ends up getting top position if they do go to the ground, and I think he could probably neutralize Katona on the ground. Even if he gets reversed, I think Azure finds his way back up to his feet, and I think he's going to be okay, and his ground awareness is actually decent at this point as well. So I think Katona is going to be game in this fight. It'll go back and forth, but I think he's going to be in over his head a little bit. I think the pressure of Azure is going to be a little bit too much. I think he's going to outscore him on the feet. And again, I think he's going to mix in enough of the ground to pull off a very competitive decision. So it's a dog or pass situation, no doubt. I understand why the line's dropping. I think it'll probably continue to drop as the fight gets closer because I do think Azure's probably the right side. So I'm going to pick Azure to win straight out in what should be a very exciting fight. Now, again, we should say this. It is in Canada. Katona being a Canadian, if it's a close decision, I would be worried about every fight on the card, but you got to kind of put that aside a little bit and just look at the matchup, and hopefully the judges get it right, because I think Azure is going to be the one that pulls off this win here.
And I completely agree that this is going to be a very close fight. Azure is very dangerous with his offensive wrestling. This is a guy that has a dangerous top position. He's got some power on the feet. His kicking game is strong. So he's somebody that's going to be aggressive and be pushing forward. Katona, on the other hand, he kind of relies on an elite grappling game, has very dangerous off of his back. He can get sweeps. He can get submissions. He can reverse. I mean, there's a lot going on there. And he does have he's pretty respectable on the feet as well. So I think on the feet, this will be close. And I think on the ground, while Azure will definitely be getting the takedowns, I think Katona will be threatening constantly off of his back. And he'll be making Azure think twice about shooting, because every time he's going to be threatening with submissions, he'll be looking for those sweeps. This is a really, really interesting fight. I don't think that Azure has that dominant top control that Dvalishvili was able to utilize to win against Katona and hand Katona his first loss. So I think this will be a lot closer compared to maybe some of Katona's other fights. So, like I said, this is going to be very razor close. I can see Azure winning it with top position, with aggression on the feet, but I also can see Azure getting swept. I can see him being put in a bad spot. I can see Katona, somehow reversing and getting, a dominant position on the ground himself. So I think this is going to be a very close fight. I don't think it gets finished, and I think it ends up being a split decision either way, but I'm actually going to lean Katona. Normally I would side with the wrestler, but with the Azure having never fought in the UFC yet, I think maybe that could play into it a little bit. So I think Katona gets the job done just barely and wins a close decision on the judges' scorecards. Now, sticking with the bantamweight division, we have Miles Johns, who is 9-0, taking on Cole Smith, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Johns open minus 175, the comeback on Smith at plus 135. Right now over at BetDSI, we are seeing Johns minus 133, the comeback on Smith at plus 111. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, more action coming in Smith's way. Man, this is another great fight. This is probably one of the fights I'm looking forward to the most on this whole card, honestly. I mean, two undefeated prospects going at it here. Both of these guys are definitely a challenge for each other as well, the way these guys match up. I mean, Cole Smith, the advantage that he has that's glaring a little bit would be obviously his length in this fight from the rip. I mean, again, both these guys have some similarities because I think both these guys like to stand and bang on the feet, but both of these guys utilize a good ground game and some good control usually over their opponents as well en route to victory. So I think we're going to see a classic back and forth battle here. And I think what the difference in this fight is going to actually be Miles Johns. He's going to be the quicker fighter. I think he's going to be the one that kind of makes it clear enough on the feet that he's ahead on the scorecards and the one that's doing the more effective damage along the way. I don't think Cole Smith is going to be able to kind of control this fight, pin Johns down, maybe get drape on his back or whatnot, or take his back. I think Johns is going to win the scrambles in this spot as well. But make no mistake, I think it'll be competitive where both these guys will have their moments again in this fight. But I just like the speed factor of Johns. I think he is a little bit stronger. I think he gets in top position more often than not. And I think he can neutralize Cole Smith on the ground, which I think he's still – Smith has some solid striking on the feet as well, but I think his best attribute is still a little bit more so on the ground than anything else. So I like what I see in Miles Johns. I think the guy's a legit prospect at 135 pounds. Cole Smith is as well, but I think that Miles Johns has a higher ceiling here. So despite the early action coming in on the Canadian Cole Smith here, I think that that's kind of wrong. I think Miles Johns is actually the side, and it's a favorite or pass situation at this point. As the line keeps on dropping, I think there is more value, obviously, that opens up on Miles Johns as well. I just see him outpointing Cole Smith, and even though it's in Canada, I think it's going to be clear enough on the cards that he still gets the W. So my pick is Miles Johns in this fight.
And I can understand why people are favoring Smith. He's already fought in the UFC. He got a win over a pretty credible guy in Mitch Gagnon. But you also got to remember that Gagnon did drop him late in the fight. So that is something to be thinking about. And Johns does have a little bit of underrated power. I think Johns is the better athlete. Johns is the better wrestler. And while Smith is a pretty decent striker in his own right, I'm a little concerned about durability after what we saw there in the end of the Gagnon fight. And I just think, as Nick said, that Johns is just a little bit superior in most areas here. Both guys have their weaknesses, but I think Johns is a lot tougher to exploit because he can put the pressure on, he can get top position with his wrestling, and he really hasn't shown many issues in regards to durability, so he can stay in the pocket and swing leather. And even though he doesn't have a lot of knockouts, I think he can get inside using his athleticism against a little bit the bigger, longer fighter in Smith, and I think that he can get the job done. So I don't think this takes too long of a breakdown, just because I think Johns is just a little bit better than Smith in most areas, and I can see him winning a decision with his wrestling, and I can also potentially see him getting a knockout. I think Miles Johns gets the job done in his UFC debut. Now, moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Augusto Sakai, who is 13-1-1, taking on Marcin Tybura, who is 17-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Tybura open minus 135, the comeback on Sakai at minus 105. Right now, what we are seeing over at BetDSI is currently Tybura minus 119, Sakai minus 101. So live margins have tightened up. Basically, a pick 'em with a slight lean towards Tybura. I'll tell you what, this is a Sakai or pass situation here as well. I mean, Tybura's back is against the wall. I mean, he's lost 3 out of his last 4 fights. It looks like his conditioning is getting a little bit worse. His defense is getting a little bit worse. He's getting a little bit more chinny. He just doesn't have that hunger that he kind of did when he was on that little streak on the rise a little bit in the UFC. Right now, it just seems like, I don't know, something's missing. He's just not the same fighter that he was, like I said, when he put on a little bit of a winning streak there and he was kind of rising towards the top. I don't know. Like I said, there's something not really quite right with Tybura here, and this is the perfect opportunity for Sakai to take advantage of this spot here. So I think it's going to be a really competitive fight as well, because realistically, Tybura is the better fighter across the board. He's far more technical. I think he's better in the stand-up. He's more diverse on the feet. I think he has the better ground game than Sakai. Sakai just has the better overall, I think, knockout power. He's got more of a one-punch, kind of hit you, connect, drop you, knock you out type of fighter. But this will kind of go back and forth. And I think Tybura, that we've seen maybe a few fights back before he got in this little skid, would probably win this fight. But from what we've seen recently from Tybura, I think Sakai has the momentum going on his side. He's going to be the one that has a more of a confidence, more mental edge in this spot as well. And I don't trust Tybura as this fight progresses. Even if it's competitive, I trust Sakai's durability a little bit more at this point. And I think he probably does find a way to win either on the scorecards. And if he does win it on the cards, it's going to be really tight, 29-28 type of decision win, or he could finish as it goes late again, and Tybura just suffers another one of those weird losses. So for me, it's just losing faith in Tybura at this point. Even though he is the better fighter, I think he probably suffers another loss. So my pick is Sakai.
And I'll agree that Tybura is more well-rounded, but I don't know if he's actually better than Sakai. And to me, the reason that Tybura is struggling lately is he racked up some wins early, against guys like Victor Pesta and Luis Enrique, and now he's facing, ranked heavyweights, and he's just not able to hold his own there. He lost a clear decision to Fabricio Verdum. He got knocked out by Derek Lewis, and then his last fight, he got, destroyed by Shamil Abdurrahimov. So, his status in the UFC heavyweight division at this point it's looking more and more like gatekeeper for the top 15 instead of a top 15 heavyweight. And against somebody like Augusto Sakai, who is on the rise, somebody that's very dangerous, has some power, big, strong Brazilian fighter, this is a guy that's looking to join that top 15 if he can get another win or two. And Tybura seems like the perfect meal, for the UFC to feed him. So obviously Tybura's dangerous. He has some good kicking game. He has some power in his hands, and if he can get the fight to the floor, his ground game is well above average. But his offensive wrestling really isn't that impressive. And as Nick mentioned, durability concerns are clear, and conditioning issues. It's seeming more and more like he's slowing down later in fights. So I think as long as Sakai doesn't get stuck on his back early, I think Sakai can set the tone here, push a decent pace, wear Tybura down, and as long as Sakai doesn't need a big head kick on the feet, I think Sakai will get the job done with boxing. And even though Sakai's UFC debut really wasn't that impressive, it was an ugly, nothing decision over Andrei Arlovsky that really didn't impress me that much. He at least got that out of the way, and now he's facing somebody that I think that he can dominate if he just moves forward aggressively and tries to knock his block off as the fight goes. Maybe not too much early, but the longer this fight goes, I think Sakai will open up a little bit, and that's where the opportunities to get the finish will arise. So I'm going to side with Augusto Sakai. I think he gets a second or third round knockout at some point. Now, moving on to the main card, we have a light heavyweight contest between Misha Cirkunov, who is 14-5, and Jimmy Crute, who is 10-0. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Crute open minus 145, Cirkunov plus 105. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is currently Crute at plus 101. Cirkunov is now the favorite at minus 122. So line flipped, more action coming in Cirkunov's way. This is kind of tough to see which way the betting public is going to go overall, how the fans think of Cirkunov. Cirkunov obviously had a lot of hype coming into the UFC. A lot of people thought that he was the next big thing, obviously a light heavyweight. And, I mean, he was looking really good, no doubt. But then he suffered his setback, and he got kind of exposed by Ozdemir on the feet, Teixeira on the ground. And then, of course, again on the feet against Johnny Walker in his last fight. So another one of these spots where, similar, we were just talking about Tabura, it seems like Cirkunov, but in a slightly different way, is in a little bit of a funk, and his back's against the wall as well. Now, another Canadian, of course, he's going to be motivated to win in his home country. The guy definitely has a lot of skill as far as technically speaking. I mean, where it's at with Cirkunov is definitely on the ground. I mean, that's offensively, that's where I think he could do his best work. He gets the fight to the ground. He's got decent wrestling. And then, of course, he excels once he gets on the ground, especially from top. The guy can do some serious damage there. But for being more of a grappling-based fighter, his stand-up really isn't that bad either. It can be effective. He throws some nice kicks in there. He's got some flexibility, some accuracy, some speed. I like what I see with Cirkunov striking. It's just his defense. And again, it's his durability that is in question here. So I think even though Crute is a little bit more hittable on the feet, and I don't like what I see defensively from Crute, I mean, that's has been a glaring issue for sure. But I mean, his heart, his durability overall, I do like what I see from Crute in that aspect of things. And I think he's going to start to settle in a little bit more. And I think this stylistically is a fight that he can actually win. Even if Cirkunov gets top position on the ground, I think Crute can find his way back to the feet. And I think his ground awareness on the ground is going to be decent enough where he possibly could get out of a bad spot and maybe end up on top and do some damage on the ground, offensively in his own right. So, more than likely, though, I think how the Crute wins this fight is landing that knockout blow on the feet and ending, the night for Cirkunov, I think, in that route. So for me, I could see Cirkunov getting the win here. I can understand the action coming in that way because he, again, technically speaking, he is the better fighter overall. But I just think the durability factor bothers me enough. And I think that Crute, again, is the younger fighter. I mean, he's only 23 years old. He's on the rise a little bit more. Maybe he's biting off a little bit more than he could chew at this point. But I have to still side with him because I like what I see potentially from him a little bit more than recently from Cirkunov. So I think it's, unfortunately for Cirkunov, it's just another loss. It stylistically might be a bad matchup, and I think Crute probably gets it done. So my pick is Crute.
The main thing here is whether or not Jimmy Crute's ready for somebody like Cirkunov, because overall, you would think, undefeated guy on the way up against somebody that's lost, 3 of their last 4, I think, and been knocked out in all 3. So, Cirkunov definitely has shown some vulnerabilities when he faces, talented guys with a lot of power. He gets knocked out. Ozdemir blasted him in 30 seconds. Glover put him in a bad spot on the ground and TKO'd him and halfway through the first round, and then Walker TKO'd him in 30 seconds again. But when Cirkunov can get his game going, when he's the aggressor, when people aren't blasting him on the chin, he's able to get fighters in bad positions and then either take a top position and get ground and pound, or get to the ground and get a submission. So I'm definitely a little concerned about that, obviously, because we haven't seen a lot of how Crute looks off of his back. So if Cerrone can get a takedown, I'm concerned there. But, Crute's a guy with a lot of power. Crute has some decent kicks. He's quick. He's aggressive. But also, he's only fought in 2 times in the UFC against Paul Craig and Sam Alvey. And, those aren't the type of opponents that Cerrone has faced in Ozdemir, Teixeira, Walker, even Krylov. So this is a huge step up for Crute. This is an opportunity to cement himself as a top 15 light heavyweight, and he clearly can prove it if he can keep the standing, if he can connect with anything significant, then he can win for sure. So that being said, if Cerrone can stay within himself and not get over aggressive on the feet, especially because the chin is clearly an issue at this point. If Cerrone can drag this to the floor, it gets interesting in a hurry. So that being said, I have to go with my gut here, and I just think the young up-and-comer Crute, this is his time. So even though this is in Canada, and I'm sure the UFC would love to have the Canadian fans be happy, but I think Jimmy Crute at some point connects with a kick to the head, and Cerrone goes down. So I think Crute is going to have to be my pick here. Now, dropping down to the middleweight division, we have Antonio Carlos Jr., who is 10-3, taking on Uriah Hall, who is 14-9. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Carlos Jr. opens minus 195. The comeback on Hall plus 155. And right now, looking over at Don Best, we see across the market minus 250 for Carlos Jr. and the comeback on Hall about plus 200. So everybody leaning a little bit more towards Carlos Jr. I get it. I mean, obviously the guy has a big edge here. And again, you want to talk about a guy on the rise versus a guy that's on the decline a little bit. And that would, you'd have to say that Carlos Jr. obviously has more of an upside to him at this point, even though he's coming off that loss to Heinisch, which was disappointing, honestly, for his career, because I think stylistically that's a winnable fight for him as well. But Heinisch did what he had to do. He won a competitive decision. He deservingly so. So it was a setback for Carlos Jr. here in this spot, and he's looking to bounce back and get a quality win over Hall. And again, it's going to be the ground that gets it done for him. I mean, Carlos Jr. has definitely improved his stand-up that you can't really take him all that lightly. He mixes in some decent kicks. He's got a little bit of power. He's a little bit unorthodox on the feet, but it's his ground game once he gets top position. And again, his submission ability on the ground is where it's at with Carlos Jr. And of course, we all know Uriah Hall, where it's at with him. It's his striking. It's always been his striking. He has developed his ground game to the point where I think it's decent enough. His takedown defense is getting better as well, but against guys that have that, serious wrestling pedigree that can control him on the ground, of course, take the fight to him. At times he does still, kind of have some problems with guys like that. Now, is Carlos Jr. one of those guys in this spot here? I think probably so. Carlos Jr. should be able to probably get this fight to the ground, and if so, have his way with Hall. Even though Hall's never been submitted, I think, there's different levels, and Carlos Jr. should be able to exploit some of that weakness on the ground. But what worries me in this fight with Hall is, man, I'll tell you what, the guy's been a warrior as of late, meaning that he's coming in and he's been putting on some of the best fights of his life, really. And he's been winning some of them. I know he's lost one in between the last 3 fights or whatnot to Paulo Costa. Of course, Costa, man, I'll tell you what, obviously that's not necessarily that bad of a loss. Now, after we saw that Costa Ramiro fight, I mean, Costa is definitely one of the best middleweights on the planet. We've seen that now. So that said, I mean, there's a lot to like about Hall, the way he's fighting. The guy doesn't quit. You can never count him out. He still has power in the third round. I mean, if Carlos Jr. lets this fight kind of play out and he doesn't get the fight done early on, and he lets Hall kind of stick around, then even in round 3, I mean, we've seen it. Hall could do some damage and possibly get rid of him. So that's the danger factor about laying the kind of chalk right now where it's at. I wouldn't necessarily recommend, again, over 2-1, 2.5-1 where the line is right now, Carlos Jr. over a guy like Hall. It's just a weird spot. If Carlos Jr. cannot get this fight to the floor, Hall is obviously the better striker. He's got that confidence about him right now, and he's fighting with that kind of no quit mentality. So that's what the dangerous aspect of this fight is for Carlos Jr. here. I'm picking him to win. I think he can get it done and he should get it done. But again, if you're laying 2.5 times your money, I don't think it's really a smart play at this point. So you stay away from it, and kind of watch how this plays out, because this is a weird spot for me, in my opinion, honestly. So the pick is Carlos Jr. He should get it done, but I definitely wouldn't lay 2.5 to 1.
And I'm the same way. You can't trust Carlos Jr. at this point. There's just been multiple times where he is the better fighter and hasn't been able to prove it. You saw it in the Daniel Kelly fight where he was dominating and then ends up getting TKO'd in the 3rd round. And then against Ian Heinisch, most recently he was on a 5-fight winning streak, looking to become a contender in the middleweight division, facing a guy that he was the more powerful striker, the better wrestler, the better grappler, and Heinisch just had more heart and conditioning and pace. And Heinisch just outworked him in the final 2 rounds and won a decision. So, when the chips are down, sometimes you can't trust Antonio Carlos Jr. So, that being said, he should win this fight. He's not an embarrassing striker. He can hold his own on the feet. He can hurt Uriah Hall standing. He's got some power. And then obviously, if he can get this fight to the floor, he should have a huge advantage. He's a tremendously powerful and grappler. He can get top position. He can get a dominant position. And he could get a TKO or submission from the ground. But if for some reason he can't get top position, if the takedowns are more difficult than you would think, then I can see him, just curling into a ball and giving up. I mean, it's so frustrating, being a fan of this guy, because, at times he just does not give you what you want. So, Uriah Hall is a dangerous striker. He's always been extremely exciting. He can pull off all kinds of crazy attacks, spinning attacks. He has a lot of power. So, on the feet, he's going to be very dangerous. And if he can keep it on the feet, it gets interesting in a hurry. Or if Carlos Jr. starts to slow down, if Carlos Jr. can't take him out early, Hall is always going to be a threat. Hall, in his last few victories, he has been able to get late stoppages. So, there is always going to be the chance that Uriah Hall can get a knockout in this fight. So I'm not going to count Uriah Hall out one bit. As Nick mentioned, I don't think he's ever been submitted, although Mousasi did dominate him on the ground and get a TKO there. So the path to victory is clear. Carlos Jr. needs to drag this to the floor, dominate Hall on the ground, and then try to get a finish. But if that doesn't work, Uriah Hall could turn the tides on this fight in a hurry. So my pick is Carlos Jr. because he should win, but I just don't trust him a lot. So I'm picking him, but very cautiously. Now dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Mikel Pereira, who is 23-9, taking on Tristan Connolly, who is 13-6. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Pereira opened minus 320, the comeback on Connolly at plus 240. And right now, what we are seeing over at BetDSI and across the market, really, you are seeing Pereira minus 600 plus 450s out there. So there's, looking at the Don Best screen, anywhere between 550 to 650 right now for Pereira. So about 6-1 across the market price. Connolly stepping in obviously on short notice. We got to say that right away. Canadian though. And the guy is one of these guys that's been around the sport for a long time, and he's a well-rounded fighter. And another one of these vets that's actually finding his groove, and I don't think has ever been better at this point of his career. So there's a lot to like about Connolly at this point. The guy has a slick submission game. He's got a sneaky good ground attack. You have to be careful. You leave an arm out, a limb out, whatever, he's going to wrap around your neck and he's going to take it. He does have a little bit of power on the feet. That's not his best attribute, but he does mix things up and has a decent attack. He does have some decent hands. He mixes in his elbows okay. And he has some effective kicking games as well. And he pushes forward to set up kind of, getting the fight to the ground and working his magic there. But stylistically, this is a tough matchup for him because Pereira, as we've seen in that Danny Roberts fight, man, he's a wild man. You want to talk about a guy that's going to do all sorts of crazy, wild, unpredictable maneuvers. I mean, and he's effective in doing so. That's Pereira. So he's wild on the feet. He's a wild man on the ground. Again, the guy, another type of fighter that does have skill everywhere the fight takes place, and his aggression and the pace that he sets. I just think it's going to be a little bit too much for Conley in his debut. I think what you got to caution here is that Conley is probably going to be overwhelmed in this fight. And I think Conley is definitely going to be the one getting outpointed too. If this fight hits the scorecards, I do see Pereira winning on the cards. Obviously I find it hard to believe on short notice in the way Pereira does fight that this fight is going to end up going the distance, because I think it's either going to be kill or be killed type of fight here in this spot. So I do think Pereira is going to be the one that finds a finish along the way, and Conley starts slowing down a little bit possibly as well. Or again, with Pereira, you never know. It could be in the first minute of the fight as well as he is. But I think he is the man to beat in this spot. I like what I see. I'm sure the UFC does as well. And, even though he's got a few losses on his resume, he is hitting his groove right now, and he's never been better. I mean, you could see the development in his game again, where I do believe that, there's a bright future ahead of Pereira if he could keep on the right path here and the UFC keeps matching him right. I think the guy can go on a run, and he could definitely be a dangerous player in the welterweight division. So my pick is Pereira to get it done, probably inside the distance over Conley.
Yeah, this one, it was originally supposed to be Pereira against Sergey Katazoko, but that fell through to visa issues, and now Connolly's stepping in. But, Connolly's not terrible. He's on a nice little win streak. He's coming in here with, I think, 4 or 5 in a row, although I thought it was kind of interesting that his last loss was to Shane Campbell via knee bar with like 6 seconds remaining in the third round. But overall, Connolly is pretty dangerous. He's actually decent from top position. So if he can get this to the floor, I think it actually does get kind of interesting because, Pereira, he's a wild man on the feet. And if this stays standing, Pereira should not just win, but probably win by knockout. Pereira is a dangerous fighter. He's been around for quite a while now, but, that UFC debut was electric. I mean, he took on Danny Roberts, a guy that had been in the UFC for quite a while, and just destroyed him with a flying knee and follow-up punches. So, it was a very, very impressive UFC debut. And, this is a guy that, he wins fights with those knees. I mean, you look and most of his most recent victories are, with a knee at some point and then follow-up strikes. So, you have got to be careful if you're Connolly. If you're shooting in for a takedown, knee to the face could end the fight in an instant. If you're standing at distance, jumping knees could catch you right in the chin. So, this is a guy that can do all kinds of attacks, spinning attacks, all kinds of crazy kicks, but he's always looking for that highlight reel. And what's I think really crazy is he's been able to have so many fights already, and he's still just 25 years old. So I've definitely gained a lot of respect for Pereira after that UFC debut, and I think that he can continue, especially against a short notice replacement. Now, Connolly is going to be dangerous. He's one of the top welterweight prospects in Canada that wasn't signed to the UFC yet. So if he can get that takedown and he can get top position, this fight could change in a hurry. But I do think that Pereira keeps it standing for the most part. I think the threat of those knees is going to make Connolly think twice about just shooting in from far away. And I think Pereira at least outpoints Connolly over the course of 3 rounds for a decision, but could definitely get a knockout as well. So Pereira is going to be my pick. Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Todd Duffee, who is 9-3, taking on Jeff Hughes, who is 10-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Duffee opened minus 170. The comeback on Hughes plus 130. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, we are seeing Hughes minus 125. The comeback on Duffee at plus 105. So line flipped, more action coming in Hughes' way. I mean, let's face it here. Duffee's been out for over 4 years. Can you really trust the guy at this point? I mean, there's just so many question marks around him. I think right away, that's a huge flag. And what we do know from Hughes, what we've seen, the guy's definitely a solid heavyweight. Obviously, training with Stipe. He's from my neck of the woods, honestly, here in Ohio. I know the guy. He's put in the work. He's gotten better. He's a very solid heavyweight. He's nothing special as far as he's not going to go out there and just destroy you on the feet. I mean, he does have some solid stand-up skill, obviously. He's, again, a savvy vet that can get it to the ground, has some good ground and pound, has good ground awareness. So he's a very solid, complete, durable heavyweight. And that's what you get with Hughes. You know, he's going to come to fight. Now, of course, Duffee is the more athletic fighter. I mean, he's the more physically gifted fighter. The guy's got the speed. He's got the power. He's got the marketability. I mean, he's the one, the prototypical heavyweight that people want to see out there fighting and going out there and just destroying people. I mean, so he's a fan favorite. He can go out there and just really put on some exciting shows while the fight lasts. But the problem is with Duffee, of course, it's his durability. Of course, his conditioning at times as well. And then again, add all the rest of it in. It's just so hard to trust the guy. I mean, all the physical gifts he has, and I'm still not going to pick him to win this fight over a very solid, but almost, average type of heavyweight and Hughes here in this spot. So can Duffee go out here and look good and perform well and look like he's a contender again? Yes. I'm not going to pick him to do so, though. I think that Hughes is going to probably come out here, weather an early storm, connect, and probably put Duffee out as the fight goes a little bit. So I do trust Hughes a little bit more so, and I'm going to pick him to win. So I can understand the dog action coming in Hughes' way. I mean, that's the only way you can bet this fight. And I kind of agree with it. So now where it's at, if you're going to be laying chalk against Duffee's athleticism and his power and his ability to possibly win this fight, you got to be cautious a little bit more. But it was definitely a dog or pass situation with Hughes, and I can respect all those that went that way. So I'm going to pick him to win. And it can never be a confident pick, either way with Duffee, though, for sure. But my pick is Hughes.
And I understand it. Hughes is more reliable. He's been fighting much more often. Duffee hasn't fought in 4 years. He's been wildly inconsistent. When he debuted, Todd Duffee was a guy that everyone was talking about. He was 4-0, making a UFC debut, or 5-0, and comes in and makes a 7-second knockout in that first fight. But that was back in 2009? So 10 years ago. It's crazy. And he's still just 33 years old. So it's not like he's over the hill. But he just can't seem to get over that hump because he had those issues. He didn't fight for a few years, comes back to the UFC, wins a couple, and then gets knocked out by Frank Mir, and then hasn't fought again. So I'm glad to see him back. He was supposed to fight back in 2017. The fight got canceled. It just hasn't quite had, that level of consistency that we've been wanting out of a good heavyweight. And Todd Duffee, though, as Nick mentioned, crazy athlete, a lot of power, very dangerous. He's going to have a big speed advantage, I would think. I think he has a big power edge against a guy like Jeff Hughes. Hughes should have the durability, though. I mean, as we've seen, Duffee can dish it out, but he can't take it. So if he eats a big clean shot, if he puts himself wildly off balance like he did in that Frank Mir fight, I mean, it's almost comical. If you watch the Frank Mir fight, Duffee just was swinging so crazy and aggressively, and I mean, he put himself in just a horrible position, and Frank Mir just blasted him, just using good, crisp, technical boxing. So if Hughes is just stays within himself, even though he did not look very good in that UFC debut. It was, a plodding, kind of boring, ugly fight that he ended up losing a decision. But if he just stays within himself, I think that he'll find opportunities because even though Duffee's the better athlete and Duffee is powerful, the technique has never really been his strong suit. And defensively, he's prone to eat a big shot and put himself in a position to eat the big shot. So as badly as I want to pick Todd Duffee, just because of nostalgia and, he's always been a fun guy to root for. I have to side with Jeff Hughes here. I think Hughes can knock him out if he connects with something solid, even though Duffee does have more power. And I think Hughes overall is probably just the more well-rounded guy. Maybe he can even take it to the ground. So, even though you're looking at these guys, Todd Duffee looks like a superhero compared to Hughes. I still think Hughes gets the job done. I think he could knock Duffee out, could win a decision. So Hughes is going to be my pick. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening. In the light heavyweight division, we have Glover Teixeira, who is 29-7, taking on Nikita Krylov, who is 26-6. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted at things so far?
Teixeira -130, Krylov -110. That was the opener. Right now, currently at BetDSI, we are seeing Krylov -128. The comeback on Teixeira +107. So line flipped. More action coming Krylov's way. Another spot where I understand it. I mean, obviously the UFC is making this fight for that very reason, Krylov to kind of get the win. I mean, matchmaking wise, it's good business for the UFC to kind of put these up and coming guys that, I know Krylov's been around for a while, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about the aging vets that have good reputations, that have that respectable resume. I mean, let's face it, Teixeira it has been one of the better light heavyweights on the planet for a long time now. I mean, the guy is definitely a world-class fighter, and a win over him makes your resume just shine, really. So for Krylov to get a scalp like that on his resume, that would be something else. I just don't know if he's going to get it. I mean, again, the aging Teixeira, the guy's been getting hit. He could definitely, be in some trouble on the feet here against Krylov. Even though Teixeira on the feet, obviously he has some decent boxing and he's capable of delivering a knockout blow himself. I don't think he wants to play that game with Krylov. Krylov does have obviously the speed. He's got the youth factor going for him. I think he does have a little bit more durability. Although, again, Teixeira, somehow, some way, even if he's hurt and rocked in fights, he's been finding a way to stay alive and get the job done. So, I mean, he does have enough left in the tank, and he's got enough warrior spirit left in him that he's been gutting it out and he's been getting it done. So that is scary, though, and that's a reason why it's hard to trust Teixeira in this fight, because it is going to start standing, obviously, on the feet, and Krylov will probably have some decent exchanges in here. And again, with the aging chin of Teixeira, with the ability that Krylov has on the feet, with his accuracy and the knockout power that he can deliver, kind of tough to pick this one here. I mean, obviously on the ground here, even though Krylov is usually above most fighters that he faces on the ground skill-wise, I mean, we've seen it. The people that have been better than him on the ground have given him fits. So Krylov is susceptible to getting beat on the ground, and Teixeira obviously is one of those guys that if it hits the floor can definitely end things early. I mean, a good look for, I think, Krylov, even though Black Witch has a pretty decent ground game. I mean, just imagine what Teixeira is going to do, how quick he's going to slice through his guard and end up finishing this fight once it hits the floor. So Krylov needs to keep this fight upright to win. Teixeira probably needs to get this fight to the ground to win. So I've been kind of bouncing back and forth on this. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards the vet Teixeira here in this spot. I know it's really, again, not the marketing move for the UFC. I think they prefer Krylov to get the win here and kind of move him up the ladder a little bit more. I just think it's going to backfire, and I think Teixeira's toughness and his fight IQ and his just technical skill set is going to be the difference here, and he's going to beat Krylov on the ground. So the pick is Teixeira, and not a surprise, he gets it done probably on the ground here.
Oh, it's no surprise how this fight's going to likely play out. It's either going to be Nikita Krylov blasting Glover Teixeira on the feet with a head kick or some strong punches, or Glover Teixeira drags him to the ground and gets a submission. Glover has been able to survive some early scares in his recent fights. He faced Roberson. He almost got knocked out and then ends up turning the tide, gets an arm triangle choke. Then he's taken on Kutalaba, again, almost gets knocked out, ends up getting a rear naked choke. So, that's just been the name of the game with him. Glover is getting up there in years, obviously, 39 years old. He doesn't have that same speed Even though he does have power on the feet, he's not nearly as dangerous in the stand-up anymore just because he's a lot more slow and plodding. So facing somebody that's a lot younger and quicker like Krylov, who's still just 27 years old, it represents a big threat. Krylov can get in there and crack him, and Krylov has power, and Krylov has he's been on a little vengeance tour. He turned the tides on Ovince St. Preux, and was able to get a stoppage victory in that fight. So, I'm done underestimating him. The one thing that I will not underestimate, though, is the fact that if Krylov does get put on his back against a really strong ground fighter, he's in big trouble. Even though Krylov is a decent grappler in his own right, he's been able to pull off some submissions against some decent fighters. If somebody like Glover puts Krylov on his back, I mean, it's only a matter of time until Glover gets an arm triangle choke. I'm just calling that right now. But if Krylov can blast him on the feet, I think Krylov has the finishing instincts to take Glover out and secure a stoppage victory. So it's really going to come down to if and when Krylov does hurt Glover on the feet, will he be able to follow through and get the job done? And I think he can. So I'm going to side with Krylov. It's going to make me sound crazy, but I think that he gets the knockout. But regardless, this fight is almost certainly going to be a finish either way. It's either going to be Glover a finish on the ground or Krylov a finish with strikes. And I'm going to side with Krylov by strikes. Now, this takes us to the main event of the evening in the lightweight division. We have Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who is 36-12, taking on Justin Gaethje, who is 20-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Gaethje opened -250. The comeback on Cerrone at +210. Was holding steady for quite a while. Now, as we get closer to fight time, though, we are seeing some movement a little bit more towards Cerrone actually coming in his way. Not really surprised by that, honestly. I figured the line would drop a little bit. Gaethje currently right now at BitDSI is coming in at -185. The comeback on Cerrone around +155 or so. So, again, line marks have tightened up, more action coming in Cerrone's way as a whole, but there is going to be some two action in this fight. There's going to be some chalk bettors out there laying Gaethje. There's also going to be some parlay guys laying Gaethje as well. This is an awesome fight. I mean, awesome main event. Both guys are going to bring it each and every time they come out and perform. I mean, they're exciting fights. Two of the best on the roster right now, especially lightweight. Gaethje's just a human highlight reel, win or lose. Obviously, he wins a lot more than he loses, but I'm saying, he's going to go out on the shield. You know that. Cerrone, technically speaking, has been one of the better fighters on the roster for many, many years. We know that. I mean, the guy has a great stand-up game, underrated at times, of course, and just that well-rounded skill set with the ground game that he has over most opponents as well. And again, that's his main edge in this fight also, is honestly the ground a little bit more. Now, can he get the fight to the ground? Gaethje does some good defensive wrestling. So that's probably not going to be an easy task, and we're probably going to get to see what we all expect, and that's going to be a pretty wild and exciting stand-up war back and forth with these guys here. So that said, it's hard not for me to like Gaethje at this spot here. I know Cerrone has performed well, and he's been looking great, and you can never kind of count him out, but obviously he's coming off that loss to Ferguson, which was because more so the eye injury obviously had to stop it. Cerrone was game in that fight, despite, Tony Ferguson honestly looked amazing in that fight as well. But that said, before that, Cerrone beating Iaquinta, I think that opened up a lot of eyes. It really let people know that he's still a legit force and a contender in the lightweight division. So, anywhere the fight takes place, obviously you got to respect Cerrone, and that with that experience and with that IQ that he has and his conditioning as well. He's one of the most conditioned athletes in the sport. If this goes into deep waters, that's where he does have an edge over most of his opponents. You know that Cerrone in round 4 will keep on bringing that pace, will keep on just coming in, being in your face and just making life miserable for you. Gaethje, on the other hand, he throws so much as the fight progresses. He does obviously start to slow down because he's just trying to take your head off. And if he gets in these all-out wars, that's kind of the times where we've seen him get in a little bit of trouble as well. So if the later this fight goes, we could see Gaethje start to kind of get in trouble, and Cerrone's just taking a little bit more control. But honestly, before it even gets to that point, I do think that Gaethje's going to do enough damage. I think he's going to work the body. I know Cerrone, that's been one of his kryptonites in the past as well. He's been kind of exposed to the body. I think Gaethje is one of those go in, guns blazing, close that gap, start just being nasty with those leg kicks, of course, everything across the board. Now, he's got to be careful. Obviously, Cerrone throws those well-timed knees, and those kicks that he has coming back at you are real nasty as well. This is going to be an awesome fight. There's no question about it. But I'm leaning a little bit more towards Gaethje, and as the price continues to drop, I think there will be some value that possibly opens up maybe his way as well. It's the timing where the line is here. I mean, the value can definitely be on Cerrone at a certain spot, and the value can definitely be on Gaethje at a certain spot. So I think, again, it's kind of a numbers game here. So as you're getting closer to plus 200, obviously there's going to be some value on Cerrone because he's got that skill set and he's got the ability to keep this fight and take it in deep waters and possibly win it there, I think. Or, again, I mean, like I said, if Gaethje drops down and continues to go the way he's going right now and you're getting a $150, $160, $170 with Gaethje, I think there's some value that opens up his way as well. So it's a numbers game here. I personally lean a little bit more towards Gaethje. I think he does get this fight done, and I think he's going to continue his excel towards a potential matchup, a mega matchup with either somebody like Conor McGregor or a potential lightweight shot once that division gets kind of cleared up a little bit more. So I like what I see with Gaethje. This should be an awesome fight. Cerrone's always game, but hard for me not to pick Gaethje in this matchup. I think he gets it done, and he might even finish Cerrone doing so.
Yeah, on paper, Cerrone is the more talented fighter. He's the more technical kickboxer. Cerrone has the better submission game, clearly. Very dangerous off of his back and from top position on the ground. But Justin Gaethje just doesn't care. This is a guy that he is the most exciting fighter that's ever competed in the octagon. I mean, in his 5 UFC fights, he's already won 6 bonuses. He's won Fight of the Night 4 times and Performance of the Night twice. One of the fights he had 2 bonuses. I mean, it's just unbelievable what this guy's been able to accomplish inside the octagon. And it's not a big surprise. I mean, he fought the same way outside the UFC when he was in World Series of Fighting. So, I mean, he's just absolutely fascinating to watch. And it's great that he's out there competing against some of the best fighters in the world. And the UFC has not done him any favors. I mean, they threw him right into the fire. He's taken on world champions in Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier. And then after, those fights were crazy entertaining. He ended up losing those. But he's bounced right back with first-round knockouts of James Vick and Edson Barboza. And, Barboza is a fighter that, if they're standing toe-to-toe and this is a kickboxing fight, Barboza should have won that fight every time. But Gaethje just puts that forward pressure on. He constantly moves forward. He forces you to fight off your back foot. And when Barboza decided to stand his ground, he ended up eating a big shot and he ended up getting knocked out. So even though Barboza technically is light years ahead of Gaethje, it just didn't matter. And that's kind of how I feel with this fight. So if Cerrone can kind of drag this out, then I think that he'd have a little bit better shot. But if Gaethje forces him into an early firefight and they're just trading bombs, I have to favor Gaethje. Especially with Cerrone, he's been taking a beating as well. I know Gaethje, I mean, you can't say that Cerrone's taking a lot of damage and then ignore all the damage that Gaethje takes, but so both guys clearly have been in a lot of wars. They've taken a lot of damage. They could both get knocked out at any point because they both hit really hard. But I really like what I've been seeing out of Gaethje lately. It seems like he's figuring some things out. That forward pressure, the really just devastating throw that leg with reckless abandon leg kicks that he likes to throw. I mean, he can do some serious damage. And he actually does have a little bit of offensive wrestling. So, if Cerrone does want to get this fight to the floor, it's not going to be a walk in the park. So I expect this fight to be on the feet the whole time. I think they're going to be slugging it out. And I think, that first guy that lands that big shot, I don't know if that'll actually be the one that ends up winning the fight because, both guys can recover pretty quickly from getting hurt. We've seen Cerrone do it when he faced Melvin Gillard. And then obviously we've seen Gaethje do it. He gets hurt, all the time in fights, it seems, and then bounces back and lands that big shot. But if Cerrone does follow up and get the job done, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think with Gaethje's forward pressure, it's going to take away some of Cerrone's biggest weapons with his kicking game. I think it'll be a lot tougher for Cerrone to land, the big body kicks, the low kicks, or a head kick. And I think Gaethje will be pressing forward, dig into the body, throwing leg kicks, mixing it up, maybe get a head kick, and then the second they get into that phone booth, it's just going to be bite down on your mouthpiece and wing it. And this is going to be a great fight. I expect it to be the fight of the night, and I think at the end of the night, at some point, Gaethje gets the job done, hurts Cerrone, and puts him out. But again, I wouldn't be shocked if it goes the complete other way, just because of the way these guys fight. But for this upcoming fight, Justin Gaethje is going to be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on ESPN Plus 16. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.